Welcome to the Jali podcast. I'm your host, Melyssa Barrett. This podcast is for those who are interested in the conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Each week, I'll be interviewing a guest who has something special to share or is actively part of building solutions in the space. Let's get started. Joel Quintela, CEO of Quintela Group, a minority-owned business that's transforming the HR tech world. He has a Ph.D. in business psychology and a background in computer systems engineering. He's not your typical HR guru. He is the tech genius streamlining HR processes for Fortune 500, 100 companies and tech giants. For more than 25 years, Joel's been in the trenches of HR technology innovation, experiencing and propelling the evolution from clunky, complex systems to efficient solutions. You will enjoy this podcast with Joel. With his background in psychology, he has kind of a one-of-a-kind way of understanding how people and technology interact in the workplace. We do even have a conversation about artificial intelligence because he's not just about creating sophisticated algorithms. He's also focused on how using tech to help companies perfect their hiring game. And we all know that everybody's looking at AI these days. So yes, I asked him about it. Join me as we talk about leveraging AI to eliminate bias in job descriptions, promote inclusive hiring. We talk about balancing technology and the human outcome in terms of creating diverse talent pipelines. And we even talk about some tech solutions for tracking and DEI. So check it out. I am excited this week to hear from Joel Quintela, who is just a masterful whiz when it comes to HR, technology, inclusion, all the work that you're doing. I just think is phenomenal. And most of my audience knows I love to celebrate people who are actually doing the work, not just talking about it, but actually doing the work. You have such an extensive background in psychology, computer systems, engineering, all of these things. And so I always like to start out with the story because everybody has a story. It's like, how did you get to where you are today as the leader, CEO of your own company?
Yeah, that's a good question. And maybe like you were talking about your dad was an entrepreneur, which is cool because you got exposed to that. I didn't. I grew up in the southwest Texas, right by the Rio Grande. My grandfather had a farm. I just spent a lot of time there. I guess you're an entrepreneur as well.
Yes.
It just never occurred to me that I should own a company. And anything else, it just didn't come up in that. It had a great childhood, but just didn't occur to me that maybe I should own a business until I started getting into school. And you're right. I started off as a computer systems engineer, actually in high school. And I don't want to tell you the programs that I was using because that'll really date me. Nobody's.
You look pretty young, so I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, the checks in the mail. Thanks. Thank you for that. But I started there, and then actually when I went to college in Arizona, I started off as a computer system engineer, and I figured out quickly that there's some really smart people in computer systems engineer, and I didn't quite fit in there. That level of intelligence was pretty high. But I actually started, so I took a psychology course, the one-on-one or whatever courses, and then it occurred to me that I didn't have to study everything that they were saying. Was essentially putting a name to stuff that I already knew. It was just a perfect blend for me because it was just like, I don't know, fish to water, whatever it is. So I switched my major to psychology, and before that, I was floundering, and it took me a long time to graduate undergrad because I was just moving around. But when I hit psychology, I just blew through it. And my last 2 years of college were, better grades. And then I just started thinking about a graduate school because my professors were asking about it. And I said, well, okay, yeah, I think so. But just like you were saying, a lot of my psychology professors, and they were wonderful, but they were speaking a lot of stuff. But I always thought, is that even work in the real world? That's sad,
Right.
but I don't know if it really works. So I wanted to find something, one of the psychology department or branches that do something like that, and that have to be something called industrial organizational psychology. But we just call it business psychology in general. So I went to the Ohio State University in Columbus.
All right.
Because at the time, that's where the top 10 programs were in the country. And I just it took me a long time to graduate undergrad as well, or graduate school as well. Because again, I got into the classes, and they were talking a lot of ivory tower. They were okay with spending an hour or two just, I don't know, just talking about theory. I'm going, does this even work? I quickly left after my master's, and then just started consulting.
Wow.
And I had the tech background. I always migrated towards the tech. So that was
Okay.
in the 90s or so when the internet was just starting to come. But I bounced around from different companies. I worked for Verizon many years ago,
Mhm.
before it was called Verizon. Uh, and then eventually in 2009, I got the opportunity to just put my money where my mouth is. I had a lot of thoughts about how to do technology. Mainly, we do HR technologies like you're talking about. Most of it's really complex. There are a lot of buttons. There are a lot of words. It takes you 2 weeks to learn how to do it. And even then, you don't really get the hang of it. So I decided to create some technology and specifically in the assessment technology. So HR assessments like personality tests, IQ
Yes.
tests, stuff that
Uh-huh.
people don't like to take. I'll share a bit more why it's important. But I wanted to blend that science of selecting right people into a company.
Yeah.
Because most people do like even interviews, right? Your informal interviews, everybody thinks they're great at interviewing people, and they're not.
No, absolutely. There's so many biases that come in
Yeah,
when you think about even the interview process or
yeah,
how people absorb information and then recommend somebody for a position that in some cases you might want to take a chance on somebody, but then there are maybe more qualified individuals that you don't want to give a chance. So it's
yeah. No,
interesting that you've combined the business psychology and the computer engineering assessment process to, I think, address a lot of the, I guess I'll call them the subjective challenge when it comes to
yeah,
HR technology, which is pretty awesome.
yeah. It's pretty cool. It's not rocket science, and my wife hates when I say that because she's going, well, it kind of is rocket
It's
science.
not rocket science to you, maybe.
Anyway, it's pretty straightforward. A selection where we play most of my company is where we sit in the hiring space. It's a probability game.
Hmm.
You don't know if you're going to make the right decision when you're talking to somebody or going through the hire process. You don't know what they're going to do in 3 months or 6 months. You have to make a guess. And there's a way to increase your probability of making a better guess. And it's what you're talking about, which is let's make sure, number one, you need to make sure you understand what's required at that role. Like every role has a like even people that you were the positions that you were in, or even just managing, you had a pretty good sense of, hey, I need people that can do these 5 things. And if you can't do these 5 things or have this quality or the ability, you're not going to do well.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people do that. They just wing it, like you're talking about, or they go, buy a job description, which is never any good, right? Anyway, yeah. So
Right.
first you start with that. And it's again, if I were to ask you, what are the 5, whatever, you would be able to tell me pretty quickly. We do that with hiring managers. And then we ask other people as well that know what performance is like. And then we come up with a list. And then we just decide, all right, how are we going to measure these things through the hiring process? So it's a deliberate, okay, I'm going to use an assessment for these things. I can't assess communication with an assessment. I got to do that in an interview. But here, and then you work backwards and go, how can I get at that stuff?
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me because when we think about human resources and recruiting specifically, we hear about so much when it comes to AI
Yeah.
and how we are implementing AI, which to me makes me nervous about bias and all of those things. So, what do you think some of the challenges that companies are facing when they start adopting technology into their process?
Yeah, no, the technology itself is that yes, most big companies have an applicant tracking system that allows it to move people through the pipeline. But one of the big issues is the candidate experience,
Mhm.
right? They're going to go through, and you probably, I'm sure your members are saying, yeah, I've applied to 50 jobs and I haven't got an interview, and they didn't tell me what it is. I don't have any idea what's going on. So communication is very important.
Mhm.
So AI does that really well. It actually can proactively go out and chat with your candidates, tell them this is what's going on, answer any specific questions that they may have throughout the process, and that makes for a good candidate experience.
Okay.
And even other things like scheduling interviews,
Mhm.
that's a crazy mess. And you'd be surprised how many huge companies do not have a scheduling program and they're just doing it themselves. So it's a whole team, just trying, hiring manager, what are your, what's your schedule? Candidates, what's your schedule? Trying to putting together this crazy email that says, you guys have to go here, here. That's crazy. AI can do that really, really well. So all of the eliminating some of those um, I don't know, repetitive tasks
Mhm.
that we have to do, AI can take those uh, and streamline those, and that's a huge help. Now, the problem that we are seeing, you know, we see it, but not a lot of people are saying anything about it for some reason. And it's the fact that now you're starting to use AI to make decisions about the individuals.
Mm.
This person should move forward, this one shouldn't. Now that's when you start getting into problems. And we play a lot in the structured interview stage. So once you're screening folks out, you have a handful of folks that you want to select in. You got to make the right decision. And one way is this structured interview process, which takes out a lot of the subjectivity and forces hire managers to follow a strict instructions. What do you do before, during, and after? You got to ask these questions because we know that you need this competency. It's very deliberate. And you got to take these notes. You have a 5-point scale. You have to look at that. So you have to justify, right? So it reduces that discrimination on our side.
Right.
We're always looking for quality of hire. How do you do that? That's the predictability. And then we're also looking at discrimination because EOC is going to come after you,
Yeah.
if you're not, anyway.
Well,
So
and I think you bring up a good point because there are so many ways that you can use AI and technology, but then there's this whole human element, right?
yeah,
That is because during the process, you're also establishing some sort of trust and inclusion. And
yeah.
so
Well, you think you are.
you hope you are.
Well, that yeah, exactly. Well, hope is not a strategy, right? You got to go ahead and when we go into companies. My first question to them is, how do you know your hiring managers are making good decisions based on interviews?
Mm,
They don't. We don't know because they're not tracking that information.
right.
In that in tracking system, there's a huge black hole, and it's typically on the interview stuff. So companies don't know who the panel members are. You leave that up to the hiring managers. Are they diverse? We don't know right now. Then once you have interviewers, are they making good decisions specifically, or are they discriminating against others? They don't know. Companies don't necessarily because they're not tracking that information, which is
Interesting.
crazy to me.
Yeah.
We decided to build a company that allows people to track that information because if you don't have the data, you can't make improvements.
Yeah, no doubt. So then to that point, when you think about innovation, I know you probably have innovative approaches that you use to help companies track and improve their DEI metrics even along the way,
Exactly.
because everybody's at least trying to have a diverse slate and
Yes.
achieve diversity and representation.
You don't know as a company. I'm always amazed by that companies don't track that information. Like you're talking about diverse panels, they have no idea. You can train your hiring managers, hey, or let say, hey, look, you need to have a diverse panel. You don't know what they're doing.
Right. Okay.
Even if you're using structured interviews themselves, you can train hiring managers, well, you should, how to do these. You can give them this structured guide that says you need to follow this. You don't know if they do. But during that conversation, we thought it's important to track that information throughout this process itself, so we know, are you making good decisions, but also is there any sort of discrimination? Do you have a department that says too old all the time, and
Right.
or
Yeah.
asked about kids, or it's easy to get into that territory. But we wanted to capture that information so that our clients can make better decisions and not get in trouble when they're challenged, because they're huge companies. They're going to be challenged. Somebody's going to sue them, right? You have to have this information to help your cause, right? Otherwise, you lose. You got to give a lot of thousands of money. The other thing that we're seeing on AI is AI is now listening into your interview.
Yes.
So as you, the interviewer, asking these questions, you're still following a structured process, but the AI is essentially transcribing everything that everybody's saying,
And summarizing.
summarizing exactly. So taking that, so the idea is, hey, we got to take that off of the hiring manager or the interviewers, because it is a lot of note taking when you use this competency-based interviewing. So conceptually, that makes a lot of sense, right? Okay, transcribing, then summarizing, and that summary should help the hiring manager make a better decision by looking at that 5-point scale.
Yeah.
So that so that's the idea. Now, what we're seeing or not seeing is that uh, we are aware that the top transcription models are biased. You know, you know, is it going to transcribe and summarize my conversation the same way it's going to transcribe yours or anybody else? It isn't, but nobody cares for some reason. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Sort of overlooking, or you have these companies are always saying, hey, we're non-biased, we're checking our AI, and it's not biased, and that's not true. They are not looking at that.
Yeah.
They're aware that they can say that. Nobody's going to challenge them. Nobody's going to say anything about, no, I don't believe your AI is not transcribing correctly. Therefore, we're gonna test you. And they also know that if they are challenged, there are no consequences.
Yeah.
So, you know,
And
aware.
yeah, I was just going to say, and it's interesting because I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't test out to even understand what the bias is.
Yeah,
But clearly, there is a way, and maybe you can speak to what kind of technology help there is to level that playing field and for especially for underrepresented groups like women in male dominated industries and all of those things.
exactly. I grew up in near the Rio Grande, right? So English is not necessarily my first language. I always say that I'm illiterate in at least two languages, right? In Spanish. But, and I know that I have a lot of grammatical errors as I'm talking. So I'm pretty concerned if an AI is transcribing and making decisions about what I'm saying.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't trust that is going to happen. So that's the other side. So you have to look at two things. One is from that transcription summarizing quality of hire perspective. And the only way you can do anything about it is you actually have to check. You have to do a lot of testing to make sure that your AI is transcribing correctly. Now, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, no doubt. And what an interesting example because my mother is an immigrant from Panama and her first language, she learned English, but her first language is Spanish. And but when we were growing up, she was like, absolutely not. You speak English.
I- no accent. That's exactly what my mother told me.
And so you end up with different cultural challenges, I think, depending on where you're going, what you're applying for, all of those things. But I think when we think about hiring, we're always thinking about competency-based hiring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Um, and so what role does HR really play in promoting that equity for competency-based hiring practices?
yeah. So they have to be very deliberate. It's this structured thing you're talking about to remove, I guess, biases, but just ensure that candidates are being treated the same way, ensure that they're being asked questions around the same competencies, ensure that they're being given the same assessments. And that's the way HR or talent acquisition mainly
Hmm.
can help with that, with the bias. And what's interesting, we talk a lot about D&I in general in the workplace,
Yeah.
but talent acquisition is a unique function because it's pretty easy to tell if you are discriminating during the process. It's just a simple audit of the process. And there are consequences, right, for doing discriminating. So it's a little unique, which is cool. So this
Yeah.
is a function to go after because they're going to have to do it. It's not whether I want to or not want to. If you don't, you are going to be sued and you are going to lose.
Mm.
Period.
Yeah.
You want to. So talent acquisition departments are constantly focusing on that as well. So not like any other departments, succession planning, talent acquisition, or talent management. Let's say that's all fuzzy. But in talent acquisition, you can actually measure that stuff. So there's an accountability right component to which is great, right? But it's
Yeah.
it's built into the process itself that the way you take it, the way you actually ensure that's happening is this structured process. You have to know what the competencies are. You can't just have one person tell you. You got to have five experts say this is what you need, and then you have to decide what are the assessments. How am I going to get at that fairly quickly, and especially in the interview? What are the competencies? What are the questions I need to ask that are based on those? So there's a structured format. So it's cool that it's baked in with talent acquisition from a risk perspective. There's a risk, right? There's a real risk, right?
Yeah.
Walmart, they're going to come after you, right? EEOC loves to plaster who they've sued, how much money they're getting, but it is going to happen. So whether you like it or not, you have to deal with it as a talent acquisition professional.
Yeah. Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back. What trends are you seeing when it comes to like workplace culture transformation? Because retention is always a big issue as well. And I know in some cases when we talk about talent acquisition, sometimes we forget that we have a whole workforce over here that's already working for the company.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a huge push on, I guess what people call talent marketplaces. So they're realizing that finding internal folks that can do the job is a much better thing than actually trying to find external folks to do the
Hmm.
job. So what clients or companies are doing is they're moving to a skills-based model. So in the skills-based model, what they have to do is they actually go through, and it's a huge process, by the way. So everybody's talking about it, we're going to do this, but it's pretty tough to do as clients are finding out, right? It's a little tougher to do than said. But the first thing they have to do is go through all of their positions. Again, this is a deliberate thing, right? You have to go through all their jobs. So you probably saw this as well. In a company, it could be five titles that say customer service, but they're completely different. And they're paid completely differently. So this process allows you to clean that up
Yeah.
so that it's easy to see if you're customer service, you're the other one, you're being paid this way, and there's a clear line for how to go up the organization. So that helped quite a bit. There's a clarity component. And ambiguity is always, you know, it's always tough to deal with, but this
Sure.
puts a nice structure. The second thing you have to do is actually do those models, the profiles for each of those jobs.
Hmm.
Again, that's easier said than done.
A lot of
Right.
work.
A lot of work. And number three actually is you have to measure your current employees. You have to know what skills they have. And that's a huge undertaking as well. But you do that so that you can go to internal resources is you have a whole bunch of great employees already. Maybe they're not even in the right position, but if you have a skills profile for a lateral position or something a little higher, you can find those um, employees based on the skills profile and proactively ask them, hey, you want maybe this is a good job. What do you think? Or here's a project that needs your skills. What do you think? Which is pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
I think that's an amazing thing.
Well, and to keep it all up to date is a whole nother task. So it's one thing to do it like one time, have everybody load their skills in, and then it's okay, I moved over here and I now have new skills.
Exactly. You have to keep up with it. Yeah. Which is tough, right? Which is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
It's a great idea, but it's pretty hard to do as companies are finding out.
Yeah.
But what we do everything, so that profile is not only talent acquisition, but it's everything else.
Yeah.
So you identify high potentials within your company, you're still going to use that profile, that skills profile, to figure out who should be a high potential
Mm-hmm.
throughout,
Yeah.
or who should go development, or who should be in the succession plan. Um, but if you do it, it works really well.
So where do you see the future of HR tech heading? Because I know you have such an interesting background and perspective. We hear a lot of, I'll call it withdrawal from diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And we we have AI that's coming in and which is doubling in capacity every couple of months and utilizing all these large machine learning models and all of that. Where do you think we're going when we talk about the future of HR tech and talent acquisition and what skills are really needed in this new generation?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy some of the new titles that come out and the kind of salaries these folks are getting, like a prompt engineers, which basically how do I ask ChatGPT to find the right stuff, that kind of thing.
Right. Or code this whole program or something.
Okay. All right. Yeah, they do hallucinate, right? They're not right. So you get people that are just trusting it, and then you go the wrong way. But we're noticing is a bit what we're talking about. And what it does really are these tasks, the repetitive task, where it can go out and somebody asks a question and they can go out and find the answers, fairly quickly and come back and provide that answer fairly quickly. So it's more of like a chat agent. So the way it's moving and HR tech is moving is that kind of thing. You don't have to go search for different applications to try to find the answer as an employee. You just sit there and you ask, hey, what's the policy for my PTO, right? And then it'll go and find it and ask you, which is really cool, right? That's a
Yes.
huge savings. That's a huge savings. Now, the problem where is different is when it starts making decisions about who should get a promotion, who should go in for development, who should be hired. Now, everybody says, because they have to say this, right? Everybody understands. All vendors, by the way, have to say we should never use AI to make decisions. There always has to be a human involved. Everybody says that. That's not the way they do it in real life.
Right. In
Their,
practice, they're doing something different.
their AI is making decisions, right? There is no human, and frankly, people are going to allow the AI to make decisions, even if you tell them not to, because it's going to make recommendations for whatever, right?
Yep.
Distinction usually. If you're just doing this other repetitive task, it's a really cool thing because it saves a ton of time and headache on the employee side or even the candidate side, but also on the employees, internal employees. That's a pretty cool thing. But companies are getting into this other space,
Yeah.
the hiring space.
And I just think there's such a challenge when it comes to transparency around AI because we want transparency when somebody makes a decision about giving us a loan. And yet now we have no transparency into why they selected this person or
People say the words, but they talk the talk, but never walk the walk. It's so weird. And I think it's just because there are no consequences. You can say whatever you want, and people are going to buy your product. And who cares, right? If it,
Are they though?
yeah, yeah. If you're working with Fortune 500s, luckily you have other departments like legal that's going to come and say, you can't do that. Come on, man. That's
Yeah.
great. You can't do that because you don't have these vendors that are just saying a bunch of stuff. And we're running up against a lot of these kinds of folks. But working for Fortune 500s, legal is going to say something, you can't do that. Or compliance, are you crazy? You're going to get me in trouble here? Or data security, or intellectual property, or your data, right? Think
Hmm.
about what's happening. All that data is coming in, especially if you're in interviews and you're transcribing everything that everybody's saying. There's a lot of IP in there, confidential information as well. What do you do as a data security? Now it's a whole new can of worms because now it's all out there.
It's discoverable.
It's discoverable, exactly. Which is actually
Yeah.
funny. Fortune 500s, one of the things that we see is some Fortune 500s want their hire managers to actually write notes or type in notes into that guide. And some say, no, I don't want my hire managers to type any notes, put any notes close to that structured interview guide. I just want them to do a final rating and justify that final rating. And that's it.
Interesting.
It's a crazy thing. The other thing that I don't think around the transparency, and again, I'm in the hiring space, so this quality of hire that I'm talking about is important, and candidate experience is important as
Hmm.
well. But what we're noticing is that everybody says these respected HR research, whatever, are doing studies on candidate experience, and of course, AI is a big topic. And the question is, do you trust AI to make decisions during the hiring process? And we found that 65% or whatever it is, the number, are do trust AI to make decisions. And I'm
Wow.
going, did you ask people of color? Do you have data that says non-people of color said this, people of color said this? And the answer is no. They don't have that information. In
Yeah.
fact, I asked that kind of question in a webinar recently. The expert says, that's an interesting question. We haven't looked at it.
Oh, wow.
What? You haven't, that didn't occur to you? That's
Right.
candidate experience is important. Shouldn't ask folks. So talent acquisition position, I see, is they have to, whether you like it or not, they have to,
Yeah.
consider this D&I perspective, but it's also a huge push on candidate experience, which makes a lot of sense. There's a dollar amount attached to treating people poorly. If you treat people poorly, you're Walmart, those people are not going to buy from you.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So experience is important, but nobody's actually dividing that information going, wait a minute, do people of color trust AI to make decisions as much as non-people of color?
Yeah.
Honestly, no. In fact, we know that, right? That
Yeah.
if anybody actually asked that question, no,
Yeah.
uh, it's almost it's so obvious to people of color. Man, I don't get you in trouble. People of color,
Not gonna get me in trouble.
but like if it ask specifically, or maybe they do ask, the data is terrible. They
Yeah.
don't want to. They don't report it. All of these candidate experience, whatever folks that do research, they say global, again, 65 or 70, whatever. Nobody reports those on the data side. Nobody reports,
Yeah.
what the are. Um, so
Interesting.
using AI from the quality high perspective, there's some issues because the transcribing, the summarizing component, and the candidate experience, which everybody cares about, is also pretty important, but nobody actually cares enough to check for the differences on
Hmm.
how, and the way that people are some folks are measuring whether people of color uh, or everybody trust AI in the process is what they do is essentially present one page,
Uh-huh.
this transparency kind of a thing that
Right.
says what we do. This is AI. This is exactly how we're using it. Who knows? Uh, a whole page saying this is what we're doing, transparency. And at the bottom is, do you want to opt in or opt out of this AI? And what they're saying, and you'll appreciate this data person, they're saying that that's the way we know that people of color trust the process because
They check the
they're
box.
left. They're not opting out. I don't think that's the same thing.
It's definitely not the same thing.
That's
Yeah.
that folks are using as a metric, right? And I'm going, I don't think that's correct. And by the way, who's going to be more worried about opting out? People of color or non-people of color?
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know,
For
where's that data? No, it isn't anywhere, right?
I love this curiosity that you have. So I'm venturing to guess that Quintela, your company, has a lot of thoughts, and as you go about the assessment process,
Exactly.
there's a lot of integration that you can create
Yeah.
based on the information that you have access to. So tell me a little bit about Quintela and what you do and your company.
So we're essentially an HR tech company that works with a lot of Fortune 500s, to make sure that they're, hiring the best employees and not discriminating,
Mhm.
essentially. And what our system does is allow talent acquisition professionals to do that structured process, that competency modeling. There's a technology that has to make it really simple to go ask the questions of the hiring manager and five experts. If you do it in an Excel spreadsheet, it's a crazy mess, right? Our technology allows people to do that so they can all say, hey, look, this is what the experts said. Do we agree? Do we not agree? And then our system allows clients to actually take those assessments that they need for that competency model, and especially the structure interview component, not only tracking the data that nobody knows, like who's on the panel, right? We want to know. So we capture that information and report that information both proactively and reactively.
Mhm.
Um,
But so how do you, and I'll ask it this way, because I think we talk about equity a lot, but
yeah,
I think in a lot of cases, I talked a little bit about how when you're thinking about retention and talent acquisition, sometimes we forget about the people who actually are working at the company already.
yeah,
But how do you ensure that a degree of equity is being pulled into the process for people that already work there versus an external candidate?
yeah. So it's a similar thing. And we always say, I can give you great people, but it's up to you to keep them, right? Because
Yeah,
culture is a huge thing, and manager right is a huge thing.
for
So
sure.
that's a big. We can only predict from the hiring side only so much. But it's the same. It's the same information or the same qualities that, if you were correct, then that's what they require on the job. But there's also a culture fit that you
Yeah.
should be assessing. Now, here's where I think this is the only way we are going to become less biased. There's always going to be bias, right? This
Yeah.
is the only. Number one, the people that are developing that AI, that team has to be diverse.
Hmm.
Because if you're not diverse, you have no idea what you don't know,
Yeah.
right?
You're not even asking the questions.
You're not even asking a question, but it's so crazy. But some people of color can look at it and go, "This is really obvious. How do you not know this?" And even my friends, as they point something out, they go, "Wow, I didn't even think about that." Like, what do you mean you didn't think about that? It's
Right. Like those offensive commercials that you see. It's like somebody had to watch this, right?
you had to go through 50 people to approve this thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
Nobody figured that out. Anyway, so it has to be diverse.
Yeah.
Uh, and then the internal team who is implementing this AI has to be diverse as well.
Hmm.
The third one is this whole aftermarket of auditors. They're going to come in and now audit, because that's the laws and hiring essentially say you have to have an external person auditing, whatever. But those auditor companies have to be diverse as well. But guess how many are? Not too many. And you've probably seen it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And then,
Interesting. And I love the fact that you all are providing assessments and bringing all that in. Because I
yeah,
think until we start answering the questions and measuring the impacts, I think people just disregard. It's, if I can't see it, if I don't measure it, it doesn't exist. Uh,
exactly. That's one of the differences is that we will go at that extra step
yeah.
because we care about that extra step. Now, is the company that's not necessarily diverse or that group that's doing the AI is not diverse, they're going to shut their computers off and go, oh, that's days, that's it, that's I'm gone. I'm probably going to do more analysis to to make sure it's correct because it's important to me. It's a motivation thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, it, Again, it's not rocket science, but you have to ask the questions and then you have to gather the data to
Right.
make sure that if it's important to you in any way, you have to do those extra steps to make sure, right? So that's where we're different. We want to use AI. We're using AI, but we're going to ask those questions.
Yeah.
Is it summarizing correctly? Is it not? How about the transcription? Is it transcribed correctly? How about the trust in the AI? We're going to ask, we're going to ask color, non-people of color, do you trust it? Do you not? What do you think? What happened? Let's get their point of view and actually do something about it versus just, you know, whitewashing or whatever. That's where we're different. So other companies do similar things, set up assessments and technology, but we're really concerned about what AI is doing and not doing. And we're taking the steps to make sure. And the kind of companies we work with, they think that's important as
Yeah.
well.
That's awesome. And I was going to ask you for like what kind of advice you would give for leaders that are transforming their organizations. But you gave a whole laundry list of things there. Is there anything else
Yeah.
that you might highlight?
I think it's the one point is important. You have to have a diverse team. Nobody's saying this, by the
Yeah.
way. I don't know why. People dance around it. I don't, it's
Yeah.
big. I always say that it's there's a rule when you're trying to find a Mexican food restaurant. And the rule is when you walk into the restaurant, and if you don't look in the background, you don't see two grandmothers that look like they could be my grandmothers, you better walk out.
Yeah. No doubt. And who's
Right.
eating there?
Yeah. Okay. Nope. I got to get out of here. If it's good enough for selecting a great Mexican food restaurant, why is it not good enough to build in your AI? A diverse team is cooking. Why is it not the same rule, which is higher stakes? Everybody knows this rule, but nobody transfers over here. And that's an important one. That's the only way we're going to get less bias.
Yeah.
Your team who's building it has to be diverse. The internal team who's implementing this has to be diverse. And the people who are auditing and monitoring have to be diverse. And people
So
are kind of
so how do you think, I mean, we have a lot of companies that are eliminating, this whole chief diversity officer position. What's your view on that?
uh, what we're seeing is that they're eliminating the name, but it's still happening, you know,
Okay.
behind the scenes, which is great, right, for us. And it's going to get a little worse, right, in the next, couple of years. But companies do find it important because there's a lot of research that says if your team is diverse, you make more money.
Yeah. Everybody likes more money, right?
Everybody likes me. If you're Walmart, your client base is probably 40, 30% people of color. You better have people on your team that understand what that huge market wants.
Hmm.
So companies do understand that. Hey, no, I better, that's my client base. That's a lot of money. I better find out what is happening so that I can make the money. And the clients that don't lose
Yeah.
essentially.
And as we talk about, as we come to a close, I think we're all thinking about the workforce and what the workforce looks like when it comes to talent acquisition over the next 5 or 10 years. We have a lot of people that are nervous, right? Because jobs are going away, but we know that jobs are being created as well. And so what are your thoughts in terms of just upskilling that workforce and how that's going to play into the talent acquisition space?
Well, just this skills-based approach, which necessarily removes everything else from the picture, not necessarily a competency or a trait that you're required, is can you do what's required of the job?
Mm-hmm.
He's no color, essentially.
Yeah.
If you can do that skills-based approach, you're gonna minimize any of the bias because you're just talking about who can do this job. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what your IQ is. Can you do this job? And if you can, that's a great position for you. So skills-based approach does work. It's a lot of work to do that, but it does help reduce that bias.
Yeah.
We get away from the fact that there are a lot of people of color that are pretty good at what they do. So if you're doing a skills-based approach, you're gonna include more people of color in your process. And that's everything: talent acquisition, succession planning, or development work. That's still going to get better.
Yeah.
So even though the names are going away, the internal processes are not going away
Yeah.
because there's money attached to that. And if there's money, you're going to do something about it, right? Or you lose out. That's a lot of money. And if upset your candidates, people of color, they're not going to go shop at Walmart or whatever it is. I'm picking on Walmart, but that's because they have millions of candidates coming through.
Yeah.
They lose 100,000 candidates. That's a lot of money for them. And they know that. So whether they believe in whatever it is, they are going to pay attention to that diversity. It's not just because the EOC is going to sue you, it's because I'm going to lose money if I don't do this correct. When you do that, things change. Things happen.
That's awesome. And I know, let's tell people how to get a hold of you and make sure that they're aware of what you offer. Because I think, as I started out, I love to celebrate people who are doing wonderful work. So I just appreciate the fact that we could have this conversation.
I really appreciate you having me. I know that, I don't know, I say a few controversial or whatever, but it has to be said, right?
Absolutely.
You can't just dance around some of the issues. But
I didn't find them controversial, so maybe other people will.
Exactly. It's just funny. Like, whenever I make comments on webinars, the only people who like them are people of color. There's 1,000 people in the webinar.
Yes, we need those allies because it's like we got to have the intention, and if they're in positions, then we got to get ourselves in the positions, right?
That's another thing of how we do it. But to reach me, you reach me, and then it's Joel, Joel, at QUINTELA.io.
.io. All right.
.io.
You got to be different, Joel.
I'm an IO psychologist, by the way, so just go with it. We ran into that. It's actually Indian Ocean is the
nice.
Yeah, we found it. Anyway, so just reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Joel Quintela. I think it is Joel Quintela is the LinkedIn page, or just give me an email. I'm happy to.
Yes. I love it. I completely wish you continued blessings and hope we will continue to interact because I think there are so many opportunities in the world, especially as we think about, the public sector and the private sector and how we're using technology. There's so many different uses for the perspectives that you bring. And I just want to thank you for all the work you're doing in the world.
No, I appreciate that because you did some pretty cool stuff.
It's been a pleasure for sure. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on the Jali podcast. Please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. See you next week.